Welcome back, everybody, to Between Two Sermons. Great to be back with you again and to have Rob Catalani back with us again.
Yes. Peru
yeah.
for a week, yeah.
Welcome back from Peru.
Great to be back.
I'm sure everybody is looking forward to hearing more about that, or has heard a little bit about that already.
Yes. Great trip.
Great. Let's dive into it since we're here. We want to help people navigate the life in between two Sundays individually and then as a group together as their small groups. And, you know, Rob, when I was hearing you talk this week, one of the things that stood out to me the most was one of your main points, that spending time with Jesus really changes our identity.
Yeah.
It gives us a new identity as we spend time with Jesus.
Yes.
I think that's so important for us to key in on. That's what I would love to just unpack with you.
Yeah.
Today.
You know, I speaking of Peru, maybe these things go together. So it was on my mind, even as preparing Acts 4, what I taught Tricia Smith, others, we were talking about the family, the impact of culture on the family. That was one of the sessions, the moral relativism, all these kind of things. But one of the big questions in our culture is identity, right? And what I saw in this passage, again, maybe I'm seeing it with those eyes, but there's these people who you might say there's a question on where does one find their identity, and in the passage it says, you know, there's all these important people, the you know, so and so the high priest and so the high priest's family, and the people you might say who have power and authority.
Yeah.
But the crisis of the passage is the unschooled and ordinary men. That's how the passage says. In other words, the people who weren't so important, who wouldn't have been on the who's list, they're the people with, in this passage, the power. They're the people that are causing so much movement and growth and turning things kind of upside down. And you're supposed to say, what gives? In fact, even the leaders in this passage who are, you know, throwing the apostles into prison, you can tell they're only doing it because they don't know what else to do. They need some time to say, we don't know what's happened. We don't know where these people are getting their moral authority, their power, why so many people, it mentions the number, 5,000, are responding to them. And what seems to be, to me, is they've been transformed in a powerful way, as we've been studying the book of Acts together. And it's not just, you know, they got a good sales pitch. They've not just, you know, caught on to some wave of a cultural movement. They have been changed at the core of their being. And I mentioned, this is the first time I've seen this very popular scripture verse, Acts 4:12. You know, there is no other name given under heaven by which we must be saved. It's a great sort of evangelism verse, but I read it now in the context of this discussion in this passage as really more of a statement of faith. It's almost as if they're saying, you know, someone's saying, listen, all I want to tell you is, you know, as far as I'm concerned, you know, that kind of an attitude. They're saying, Christ has become so central to who I am, to what's happened to me, that if you want to know why I am the way I am, it's because of him. And I say new identity because even Peter, who's a main player in this passage, we know him in more recent history of the Bible, of this guy who capitulated at the trial of Jesus, who gave into his fears. Right? I mean, he surprised himself. I don't think he ever dreamed that he would be, even 24 hours earlier, not saying he was a follower of Jesus, and it was a horrible seeming end. Here, same culture, same people, same fears, right? Jesus had been killed.
A couple months later,
he seems to have this new resolve that says, you know, I'm facing the same power people, the same forces of opposition, and he's very clear and very strong, and seems to have at the core seems to have overcome his fear, is not really care about what other people think about him so much. I mean, that's so key to fear, people pleasing, so to speak, and he's got just strong conviction, and so that says to me, this guy's identity has been formed in a stronger way.
That's a really great point. I was thinking about even my message last week. in researching that, the theme of identity came up for me even in there. This lame man was getting all of his identity from either three things that we gain our identity from: either what people say about us,
Right.
what we do, or what we possess. Generally speaking,
Right.
those
That's
three
right.
things.
Right.
So even in the culture that you're talking about, as we're talking about what is just happening in this passage, the people who have the most at stake in their identity are the ones who don't want to give it up the most.
That's right. That's right.
The,
That's right.
The people
well
with
said.
power,
That's well
the
said.
people in positions of authority,
That's right.
they're like, I'm staking my whole identity on this.
Right.
I'm not going to give that up.
Right.
But most likely, a lot of the people weren't people with a lot of power.
That's right. No, that's right. And it seems as if, at least if this whole passage was the whole story, Acts 4, it's almost as if everything's been turned on its head.
Yeah.
And that, because here the disciples, the apostles, it says they stop them almost. The appearance from reading the first few verses is almost as if they're in the middle of a sermon and they say, "Be quiet." I mean, they interrupt them and disrupt them because they're teaching the people, the everyday Jews that were gathered, right there in the temple court. It's almost like if I came in, you were a pastor, I came into your church, I'm making this up or whatever, or I came in, and I started doing my thing, and people were, and you'd be like, "What are you doing here?"
Right.
They came into what was their not only place of authority, but as you say, their whole identity was shaped by that. In fact, one commentary I read said that Luke's trying to make this point, the writer of the Gospel of Acts, we believe, is trying to really make the point about the people who got their identity particularly from the temple. The temple itself, we know this, had become almost an idol, had become, of course it was God's, it had all these great reasons that it was constructed, but it had become something bigger or different. It had replaced God in a way. They'd worshiped the temple, and they got all their identity, power, authority from the temple. And here these leaders are doing their thing right in that same place. So you're right. Their identity was threatened. But it's a reminder to us that if your identity is built on anything other than Christ, especially as followers of Jesus, you're vulnerable. And I think Peter, at least in this passage, he's not a perfect man, or John. I think after all that he's been through, I think he's come to a place of greater maturity, greater understanding, greater conviction, and it takes time to get there because we don't become instant mature Christians overnight.
Right, definitely. And the lame man in this passage is the one that starts the whole thing off. He gains a new identity.
That's right.
Because he's been transformed.
That's right.
He's in a sense, he's like a picture of
That's a great
this
example.
principle that you're saying.
That's right.
He becomes the living embodiment
Yes.
of this principle. His identity is drastically changed in a moment. Ours takes time.
But it's interesting you say that because even part of the reason they don't take even more drastic measures, they put them in prison sort of as buy them some time to have a discussion, and they say, and their conversation is revealed. They say to themselves, "What are we going to do?" Because this man, the man from John, or actually chapter 3, excuse me, who was healed, who started this whole thing, this discussion, this trouble, the arrest of the apostles, so to speak. He's been around forever. They mention his age, as you mentioned the Sunday before. He's 40 years old. He's been around here for a generation standing in front of the temple. How can you deny what God has done in his life? He has been changed. He's a completely different person.
Yeah. So that begs the question, maybe, as people think about this in their own life, as people try to apply this in your group, maybe one of the great questions that we can interact with as a group is, in what ways is your life changing? Yeah.
No, I think I love that. And I think where it ends, the passage, it's just one of these memorable verses, when they say, we're commanding you. Now they use the word command. We're commanding you to no longer speak in this guy's name. And Peter, just on his feet, is kind of clever. He goes, well, whether we should obey you or God, we'll let you be the judge, kind of like. But all I'm saying, he says, is we can't help but speak about what we've seen and heard. I love that. He doesn't say, God told us to do it, so we should do it.
Right.
We're under orders. He's saying, we can't, it's so impacted my life. It's like, I don't know, what would be a good analogy? Someone that's in love or someone that's just had a conversion experience. And he's saying, I can't help it.
Yeah.
And so I say to myself, reading the passage, is that my story? You know, has Christ's life formed my identity, or is my identity in the stage of this kind of formation such that, in a manner of speaking, I can't help but talk about what God has done in my life and doing in my life? Is it so to the core of who I am? Is it so captured my imagination and my heart, my salvation, my walk with God, the Spirit mentioned in this passage? Again, Peter was filled with the Spirit. That it's native and natural for me to talk about it. I think that's a good question to ask ourselves in this as we look at this passage.
Yeah, that's great. And a great one for maybe you even to start with. Like, where have you experienced that? When's the last time you experienced almost having to tell somebody about what God's doing in your life because he's really at work? Yeah. Certainly that's not an everyday thing for a lot of us. But there should be times in our lives where he's working that we can say, wow, I have to tell other people about this. Yeah. So hope you have a great discussion. Hope this is something that's allowing you to apply these passages to your life, and look forward to joining you again next week on Between Two Sermons.
Amen.